Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and today it's finally time to talk about Young Wizards. Young Wizards is a YA fantasy series by Diane Duane. It is one of my favorite series of all time. It was kind of my Harry Potter before I discovered Harry Potter, and I recently went on an epic rereading binge of the first 9 books. There are 10 novels and 1 collection of stories in this series. The first book, So You Want to Be a Wizard, was published in 1983, and the latest 10th book, Games Wizards Play, came out in February 2016. In this overview, I am only going to be talking about the first 9 books because I haven't read the 10th book yet. Now that I've gone through that preamble, here's what the books are about. In So You Want to Be a Wizard, a 13-year-old girl named Nita is running away from some bullies who are tormenting her at school. She takes refuge in, of course, the local library, and while wandering around, a book on a shelf literally snags her, and it is a wizard's manual that tells her she can do magic. Maybe not quite believing this, she takes the wizard's oath at the beginning of the book, and then a couple of days later she meets a 12-year-old boy named Kit who has also just found his wizard's manual. Nita and Kit work their first spell together, and then they must go through their ordeal. Every wizard who takes the oath goes through an ordeal where they prove themselves, and they often come face to face with the great evil that all wizards are dedicated to combating, and that is entropy, the slow death, the winding down of all things, or what's called most commonly in the series, the lone power. Nita and Kit are trying to work a spell to get Nita's space pen back from the bullies who stole it, but while doing that, they kind of accidentally call a white hole to them. Its name is Ed, they become friends with it, and then they get taken into another universe, an alternate version of their world where the lone power holds sway. They have to face this power, get that pen back, and get home safely. This book is very fast-paced and it just sucks you right into this wizardly world. I've always been impressed at how quickly Nita and Kit start doing magic, and they do it on their own. There are adults in the series, there are senior wizards and authorities, and Nita and Kit have advisory wizards for their area called Tom and Carl, and they have to check in with them, but this is more like a working relationship than being in school. They can check in with more senior wizards if they want to, but mainly they decide what they're interested in, and then they just start investigating it and researching it. That's something that Nita does so much in the series. She has to get deeply involved in some very advanced wizardry when she's just very young, and she does it. She's capable. She just reads a lot and figures it out. As a kid who was homeschooled, I think I've always subconsciously appreciated this model that Duane uses because growing up, I didn't really have the school experience that a lot of people did, and my way of learning things was pick up a book and teach yourself. If you wanted to know something, read a book about it. It didn't need to have that Harry Potter school of thought where you send kids to a school and it's modeled on all other school systems and you have classes and exams and teachers. I was used to just teaching myself and reading a book, and that's how it works here. In the second book, Deep Wizardry, Nita and Kit are working with Sri, a whale wizard. They agree to participate in a ritual reenactment of a historical event, which kind of acts like a spell to keep the lone power at bay. Unfortunately, when Nita says that she will play a particular role in this ritual, she doesn't realize at first what the consequences are of what she's just promised. In the third book, High Wizardry, we finally get to meet the other main character of this series named Diane. She's Nita's younger sister, and she also becomes a wizard. This book is about her oath and her ordeal, which takes place on another planet, where Diane becomes kind of a godmother to an emerging form of silicone-based life. In A Wizard Abroad, Nita and Diane's parents have discovered that they are wizards. They initially don't quite understand that Nita and Diane and Kit have jobs as wizards that they can't avoid, and they have responsibilities that they can't shirk. They want Nita to take a break from wizardry, haha, so they send her to Ireland to stay there with her aunt for the summer. But as you might expect, Ireland is a hotbed of magical activity, there are lots of wizards there, and wherever a wizard is sent, they are usually asked to step in and help with something. This is also the book where the Irish heartthrob Ronan shows up, and I want to go on record now as saying that I have always thought, and I still think, he is a more interesting love choice for Nita than anybody else in this series, particularly that one person that, come on, it's there. Come on. In the 5th book, The Wizard's Dilemma, things get darker. Nita's mother gets sick, and Nita begins learning how to manipulate the kernels of people or planets in the hope of kind of rewriting her mother's body to eliminate her illness. But where illness and death are, the lone power also is, so this is once again a confrontation with it, where Nita has to decide whether she's going to give in to the tempting promises of the lone power or hold fast to her wizard's oath. In A Wizard Alone, Kit is asked to check into the status of a very young wizard who has been caught in his ordeal for over 3 months. Nobody knows why this ordeal hasn't ended yet, so Kit has to investigate. The twist is that Daryl is actually autistic, and on top of this, he is a special kind of wizard. This is the one book in the series that I will caution people about because of how it portrays autism. It is just dated. It was never meant to be insensitive, and at the time that it was published, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I think that how Duane was writing about autism was meant to be a positive thing, but how we think about autism, what we know about autism, and how we talk about autistic people and their lives and their choices have just really changed since then. So this may really bother some people. It comes across as being a little insensitively ableist when I don't think it intended to be. But despite all that, despite how that might rub some people the wrong way, it is a decent book, just one that I've never thought was particularly brilliant in the series. And then we come to books 7, 8, and 9, which is when the series starts to get a bigger, more expansive and detailed feel to it, more like what I think people expect from YA fantasy today. And that is just because how wizardry works, how spells work, how the wizarding world is set up is explained in more detail, but also finally you get a bigger cast of recurring secondary characters. Carmilla, who is Kit's older sister, not a wizard though, shows up in these books. Ronan and Daryl return, and there are 3 more major secondary characters introduced. In Wizard's Holiday, Nita and Kit go on a cultural exchange program for wizards, and they go to a planet that seems a little too perfect. And back home, Diane has to deal with 3 alien wizards living in her basement. They are Roshan, who is a haughty prince, Scarrett, who is a giant purple centipede, and Philippe, who looks exactly like a fir tree. In Wizards at War, something happens to the older wizards in this universe, and only younger wizards retain access to power. There is this huge evil presence building in the universe, overtaking everything with darkness. It's called the Polulus, and all of the younger wizards who still have magic go to war against it. And finally, in A Wizard of Mars, Kit's obsession with Mars pays off. A team of wizards discovers evidence, a message in a bottle from the lost Martian race, and when Kit opens this message, he gets into a bit more trouble than he bargained for. This book has some really great references to classic Mars science fiction stories like Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barsoom novels and The War of the Worlds. This series has a wonderful theme of not just fighting evil on a grand scale, but also in your everyday life. Simple things like not lying and not contributing to the pain and suffering in the universe because that is doing the lone power's work for it. It's about being a good person and doing good in the world, trying to improve the world. So not just fighting the epic battle on an alien planet, but also a simpler thing like inventing a spell to clean up ocean pollution. This series also shows how responsible and capable and smart kids are, that even young people will dedicate and commit and give of themselves to do good in the world. Like I said earlier, this is a YA fantasy series, but I have a couple of addendums to that. In particular, the first 3 books in this series, So You Want to Be a Wizard, Deep Wizardry, and High Wizardry, are more like middle grade, maybe because they're the oldest books that were published in the 80s. They just don't feel like modern YA to me all of the time. The other thing is that it's fantasy. I mean, yeah, these are books about wizardry and kids doing magic, but it's also very science fictional. The wizardry itself is bounded by science, by the physical laws, and all the wizards, all of our characters, end up learning a lot of science, a lot of math, in order to create and work spells. It's things like, if you want to go to the moon to hang out with your friends, when you build a spell to do that, you have to know and calculate how much air to take with you so that you won't suffocate after a couple of hours. So if you're anything like me, you will love this series because it is a really great blend of fantasy and science fiction. One of the things I probably appreciated the most while rereading these books, because I'm an adult now, is that in these first 9 books, Nita and Kit have a working relationship and a friendship rather than dating. I don't know how things might change in the 10th book because I haven't read that yet, but it was just really refreshing that a boy and a girl going through puberty and teenage angst and hormones can maintain a friendship without dating. That's not to say that there isn't romance or hormones or whatever in the series, because there is, but I think that is presented in a part of all of these changes happening in these teenagers' lives. It's lumped in there with things like being introduced to adult responsibilities and dealing with loss and grief as well. I've always loved the adult characters in this series, and I want to talk a little bit about why. I'll start with Tom and Carl. They are the advisory wizards that Nita and Kit and Diane report to. So they're not always in the story, they pop in here and there, but when they do, they are just great adult figures. They never talk down to these kids and teenagers. They give good advice, they talk and they explore options with these kids, and if they don't have the answer, they're honest about that. I'll extend this to the other adult characters like Nita and Diane's parents and Kit's parents. Initially, of course, they have to struggle with that bombshell that magic is real and their kids are wizards and they can't do anything about that. They can't interfere. They don't have parental authority over that part of their kids' lives. But they do adjust to this, and they maintain these healthy, loving, trusting, and communicative relationships with their kids. And I just love it when adults and parents are portrayed this way in middle grade and in YA, because it just irritates me too much when adults are always seen from teenagers' viewpoints as being annoying, and that's not the case here. From both sides of these relationships, from the adult side and the kids side, it's healthy and loving and just realistic like that. Not everything is terrible. As much as I love this series, it's not perfect, and I have a couple of gripes. The first one is kind of stupid. This is kind of nitpicky, and I'm sure that's because I'm an adult and not a teen anymore, but in some of the later books, it first starts in Wizards at War, and it just becomes this big deal for me in A Wizard of Mars. The teenage banter, some of the dialogue between these characters, especially with Daryl and Ronan and Kit, in A Wizard of Mars, I was kind of rolling my eyes like, do teenagers really talk this way? And I'm sure that's me, but every time Daryl says, "your kitness," when he's talking to Kit, I just want to go, really? Did I talk like that when I was a teenager? I probably did. The other thing is Carmilla. Can we please get rid of Carmilla? She's Kit's older sister. She's not a wizard. She has some great uses as a secondary character. For example, her interactions with Roshan are pure comedy gold. But beginning in Wizards at War, she becomes much more involved in the plots of the stories. She shows up all the time, and I am so tired of her. She is the stereotype of that flirty, flouncy, boy-obsessed teenage girl who always wants to go clothes shopping. Please give her something to do other than flirting and shopping and making eyes and terrible dialogue with Ronan. Please, that's all I'm asking for. I don't want to end on a complaint, so there is one more thing I want to mention, and that is that I have the original versions of this series, the books that are physically in print, but there is also another rewritten version of this series. Because this series was published sporadically over a very long period of time, kids reading them today will just notice that they're dated. There are things in the first couple of books from the 80s that, they just don't get the cultural references, for example. And apparently around 2008 to 2011, Duane rewrote the first 9 books to update the technological and scientific references, the cultural allusions, and to fix some of the chronological problems, because if you read the original versions, you'll notice there's some interesting chronology going on there. So that stuff is fixed in the New Millennium editions. I haven't read them, but I have heard good things about them. If you're an adult, I would definitely recommend just read the original versions, but if you want to give this series to kids and they're okay reading ebooks, you might try the New Millennium editions for them. But I want to end this video with a very shallow question, and that is, are Tom and Carl a couple? I have always assumed that they are, but I was a little disappointed after rereading 9 books and not finding any textual evidence, as far as I'm concerned, that they are or are not a couple. But if you have read any or all of these books, give me your opinion, and I will talk to you again later. Bye. Bunnies. There are no bunnies in this series.